Hello, my name is Linda Walters, and I would like to talk about evolution. And first of all, to understand evolution, we must first understand the definition of evolution. And the definition of evolution is the process by which different kinds of living organisms change over time, change or is changing over time and has changed throughout history. And one of the greatest evolutionists was Charles Darwin. In 1839, he wrote a book relating to evolution and natural selection. And he said the theory of evolution is people evolve over time and how we adapt to our changing environments. In other words, we start out, in an example of today is we start out as babies, but we don't stay babies. Or we would die out. There would no longer be a population of human beings because we would soon die out. But we evolved from children. We evolved from infants to adults, and in the stages in between. So it also involves a genetic process by which we adapt to changing environments. So in other words, evolution is just as it describes. We as humans and as living organisms, we evolved. Now, another topic is what we want to talk about is the difference between micro evolution and macroevolution. One difference is micro is just what it says, it's small. It involves, let's just give an example, the beetle. That's just one population, a family of beetles, and you do a study over beetles and their offspring, their genetic makeup. It's just micro involves one population, to where macro involves a larger population. And an example of macro evolution would be, let's just go with the ape and how they evolved. They went from being stooped over to standing. And we wonder how did that happen? And through a main study, we'll look at the apes, and it took 15 years for them to put together the genetic makeup and the bone structures of this ape called Lucy. And in the study, they found out through microevolution is they did a wide study and showed that at first they had fingers that were not necessarily straight, which enabled them to climb trees. They walked kind of stooped or curved over. And later, as you can see now, modern man has evolved to the point to where we stand upright. But in the study of this, in the macroevolution of the apes as they evolved during time, we show that they have we as humans have the characteristics of some of the apes. So in macroevolution, they studied a broad species, even though it may have been it was not necessarily one species, because we got to remember they did not necessarily walk upright. They walked crooked over. Their hands were turned. But as time went on, looking at photographs of when you're studying macroevolution, you look at how they evolved from being crooked to how they eventually began to stand. Another process is natural selection. Now, this was an interesting topic to me, because natural selections just simply mean the natural gene, and I'm going to glance at my notes for a minute, it's changes in the gene's frequency. And by that we mean it changes in the alleles and the frequency of it. And it also, natural selection is considered the way we change over time, how we're suited to our environment. And one example of that, if you remember, if you looked at the video, it was of the people that had the malaria and sickle cell anemia, and how in certain European countries and in Africa, they were curious as to why people had sickle cell anemia is usually an inherited trait, but they soon discovered that the mosquitoes in that environment, the people were bitten, and the mosquitoes happened to be a carrier, and that's how they were able to happen to be a carrier, and that's how they discovered about natural selection, in that they adapted to the environment in which they were in, that created the sickle and the malaria fever. The mosquitoes were a carrier of it. Now, let's go back to adaptation. would adapt to natural selection also involves adaptation. How we adapt to our environment, and adaptation is the feature that's common among certain populations. There's cultural adaptations. There are when you say cultural adaptation, let's just take example the Alaskans. The Alaskans, they're the Eskimos. I'm sorry, the Eskimos. They're basically cold-natured people. They're cold year-round, but they adapted their environment to where modern man now, let's just example of here in the United States, we have all variations of temperatures and how we adapt to certain environments. In other words, if you live in a hot climate like the Sahara Desert, you wonder how people survive that, but they adapt to we adapt to the surroundings in which we're in. And I'm going to glance at my notes, and it briefly stated that populations change over the course of adaptation is the result of one of the means of modification. Adaptation is the result of natural selection. And I just found evolution to be an interesting topic, and how we evolved, even though it has been met with some difficulty and challenging. Scientifically, it has been proven that there is a process called evolution, and that can be evident in the fact of we start out as infants and we eventually evolve into adults, and we also adapt to the environment in which we live.